Welcome back, grade 10. So we're looking at citizenship today. And because this course is about globalization, we're looking at the idea of global citizenship. And the first thing I want you to identify is that there may be different characteristics assigned to citizens depending upon what kind of regime you live under. So I want to think about that for a moment. So for example, in grade 11, next year we'll be looking at ultranationalism. And when we look at ultranationalism, we'll study Stalin's USSR and we'll study Hitler's Germany. And when we study Hitler's Germany, we'll see that the expectations on citizens under Adolf Hitler are somewhat different than the expectations that Trudeau has for us here in Canada. So I want you to understand that one of the big themes that we teach you in high school social studies is this relationship between government and governed. And one of the actors in that relationship are citizens. So what kind of citizen does Adolf Hitler want? Adolf Hitler wants a citizen that is obedient. So in an authoritarian state, in a non-democratic authoritarian state, governments are looking for obedience from their citizens. So when you read 1984 by George Orwell, when you look at many of those dystopian pieces of literature, you can see that the relationship that Big Brother in 1984 is trying to create with Winston Smith, the protagonist of the story, is that they want Winston to be obedient. They want Winston to, if he's taught that 2 + 2 = 5, they want him to actually believe that. So the term citizenship is connected to a relationship between government and governed. But different governments may have different goals for what kind of citizen they'll create. Adolf Hitler wanted an obedient citizen. So he began to use indoctrination to create obedient citizens. And although it may be possible in a few cases, it's difficult to indoctrinate people as they get older. So if you're a would-be dictator, like Adolf Hitler was, you're going to target certain demographics within your population. And he targeted the youth. So indoctrination is often associated with public education. So in Adolf Hitler's Germany of the 1930s, public education was used as a vehicle to create obedient citizens. He wanted to shape their hearts and minds. So with obedience comes indoctrination. With indoctrination comes this goal that I want to control your hearts and minds. So Adolf Hitler had an agenda. And a part of that agenda was that he wanted his nation to embrace anti-Semitism. Now, many of the people in his nation already felt anti-Semitism, generations before he became the Führer, but he wanted to use Jewish people as a scapegoat so that he could justify his usurpation of power. So how did he teach anti-Semitism? Well, he taught it when he taught reading. I don't know if you can remember the first books that you read, but they probably weren't about how some people within our community are poisonous. But in Nazi Germany, I just have to type this out. In Nazi Germany, there's a book about poisonous mushrooms. And this is the book that they used to teach kids how to read. But they're not just teaching kids how to read, they're teaching kids how to hate. That the fun purpose of it was, let's teach them how to read. You need them to know how to read. But, what are they reading? They're reading about how there are certain things that are dangerous. And it would be best to avoid danger. And if you could, wouldn't it be better to remove elements of danger that are around you? Well, in the forest, some mushrooms are dangerous. So wouldn't it be better for the forest to get rid of those poisonous mushrooms? And then let's make the poisonous mushrooms look like Jewish people, including with them the Star of David that identifies Jewish people. So these poisonous mushrooms are meant to be the personification of Jewish people. It's a metaphor. If we want to create the forest be safe, we get rid of the poisonous mushrooms. If we want Germany to be safe, let's get rid of the Jewish people. That was the plot of the story. Yes, sir?
I barely understand metaphors now, so how would a little kid get that?
You know, the whole point is that they don't want the kid to see that they're being indoctrinated. They just want the kid to read the story. And in the story, there's these mushrooms that are bad, and the mushrooms that are bad have that little star. So now, subconsciously, the kid is going to associate that star with danger and things that need to be removed from society. Sometimes it's a little more obvious, like in math class. So in math class, they want to teach kids how to do division. So rather than just putting some numbers, let's create a word problem. You know, the community has 10 million Reichsmarks, and they could build an insane asylum for invalids, and that would cost 10 million Reichsmarks. Average houses cost 10,000 Reichsmarks. The question could be, how many houses for hardworking German families can we build instead of an insane asylum for social invalids? And you do the division, and it's about math. But while you're doing the math, you might be sitting there saying, well, wait a minute. Why would we build this hospital for invalids? Why don't we just kill the invalids? Euthanasia, mercy killing. Part of the genocide, or part of the Holocaust, isn't targeting Jewish people. It's targeting those people that Adolf Hitler deemed to be, and his party deemed to be, somehow socially invalid. Maybe they had some physical or social abnormalities, right? So the concept today is citizenship. And something I want you to begin with is an understanding that citizenship is connected to our relationship with our government. And depending upon what kind of government we have, the term may be defined differently. So if in an authoritarian state, they want obedience, and you can see that in 1984, you can see that in Starship Troopers, you can see that in Nazi Germany. What kind of qualities should we expect from a citizen in a democracy? What do we need? Yes, sir?
Well, on the board, liberalism is said to participate in the democratic system.
Boom, you got me right there. So the key to a democracy, a liberal democracy, is the will of the people. How does the government know the will of the people? If the government in a liberal democracy is legitimate because they are embodied by the will of the people, then key to a democracy is the people must express their will. They must act. So in a democracy, it's not obedience that is expected, it's action. That citizens should be active. So in Canada, domestically, we're active by voting, we're active by joining political parties, by having discussions. Last year in grade 9, you had a political unit. You're somewhat familiar with political activities. The topic today is more global. If citizenship is based upon action, then what might be some scenarios that you could hypothesize so that you can illustrate what an active citizen would do? I'll give you an example. Craig Kilberger. You're probably aware of who he is. If not, I'll bring him up. He, at the age of 12, read the newspaper. That's strange enough right there. That's probably enough right there. You know, he's reading a newspaper. That's strange. So Craig, when he was 12, he's 38 now.
Like that once or just like every week?
Sorry, what?
Did he read the newspaper once or like every week?
No, he used to read it with breakfast.
Every day?
Yeah. So he's reading the newspaper one day, and when he was reading it, he read that there was a child his age that had been assassinated. So April 16th, 1995, this child named Iqbal was assassinated. Not killed, not a random killing. It was an assassination. It was a hit. And Craig is sitting there, Craig Kilberger is sitting there in his Greater Toronto Area home, reading this, and as a global citizen, this is a moment where he becomes a global citizen. He says, wait a minute, something's wrong here. Something, like, how does a 12-year-old child get assassinated? I need to learn more about this. So his first responsibility was to learn more information. So he went to the library, he collected evidence. He's like, what's going on? Why was Iqbal killed? And he finds out that Iqbal's killed because he was killed by the carpet mafia in Pakistan. A week earlier, Craig didn't even know what the carpet mafia was. But the carpet mafia in Pakistan are a group of people who make carpets, and they deal in crime in the criminal underground, and they have a lot of children that work for them. Children that are de facto slaves because they're sold to the carpet mafia by their families. See, Iqbal had an older sister that needed to get married, and the family didn't have enough money for the wedding, for the dowry and things like that, so they took out a loan from the carpet mafia, and Iqbal would live with the carpet mafia making carpets until they could pay off the loan. Well, while Iqbal's working for the carpet mafia is going to pay or charge a little bit for room and board, right? So you're gonna create an environment where Iqbal's never ever going to be able to make enough money to leave, right? So Iqbal at times literally chained to the machine, right? So it's not a metaphor, it's not a Marxist metaphor. He was literally chained to the machine, and eventually he does escape. So when Iqbal escapes, he ends up going to the press, going to the media, talking about how inhumane the conditions were at the factory, and the world press kind of captures the story. You know how the world press sometimes gets interested in something? Well, the world's press gets interested in a story, so now everybody in America wants to hear his story. So Iqbal goes to the United Nations in New York City. Iqbal goes and talks to Oprah, and Iqbal goes and talks to President Bill Clinton at the time. Iqbal becomes this international spokesperson against child slavery. That's a threat to the profit of the carpet mafia. So when Iqbal goes back to Pakistan, he tries to just be a 12-year-old kid again. He goes to school, he's riding his bike home, he gets killed. And that's the story that Craig Kilberger reads. And Craig says, this is wrong. Child labor's wrong. There shouldn't be 12-year-olds that are physically chained to machines. So Craig went and he talked to his class. And he said, you know what, class, there's something that's happening in the world that I think you guys need to be aware of too. So what's another activity of a global citizen? Talking to others, spreading the word of what's wrong. And he tells the story of talking to, he was 12, he went and talked to the grade 12s. And they asked him questions that he didn't know the answer to, so he got upset and he went out in the hallway and threw up all over the place. Because he felt overwhelmed. Because he wanted to do so much, but he felt so powerless. But he ended up in his own class where he's 12, he ended up getting others that were excited about what he's talking about. And he grew this organization called Free the Children, because they wanted to free the children. So he creates an NGO. That's what a citizen would do. Here's a problem, I need to be the solution. Gandhi said, be the solution you want to see for the world, and Craig Kilberger is doing just that. Now he gets to a point as a 12-year-old where he has had different fundraisers and stuff like that in the Toronto area, but then he says to his parents in December of, I'm going to say 85, right before his birthday, so he's born December 17th, so he's not quite 13 yet. He says to his parents, I have to go I have to go to Pakistan, I have to go to India, I have to go to Bangladesh, and in order to do this, I have to go on my own. I have to go on my own. In order to know that I'm the one doing this, I need to go on my own. And Craig tells the story that, earlier that year, he didn't even cross the street in Toronto without his parents with him, because he needed that safety. But here he is now asking his parents to go to Bangladesh, to go to India, to go to Pakistan, because he on his own had to go there to help free the children. Obviously his parents had some, some problem with that idea, but they let him go. And it's an amazing story. He goes to Bangladesh. He's meant to meet somebody, a family friend in Bangladesh that's going to pick him up at the airport. He goes into the airport and his friend's not there because his friend doesn't have a ticket, so he can't get into the airport. So Craig ends up getting hungry. He leaves the airport, goes across the street to a vendor. Boom, his friend's there. So they actually just kind of link up by accident. Then from Bangladesh, they need to walk to India. When they get to the border with India, he didn't have the right papers because it said that he was going to get into India by bus, and they were on a bus, but then the bus, the transmission went, and they didn't want to wait, so they just walked the last little bit. So when they tried to enter India illegally, here he is, 13 years old, because his birthday had passed, and there was a AK-47 at his head, saying, "Why are you trying to enter my country illegally?" So it's definitely quite the experience, and if you ever get the chance to read some of his books, they're worth reading. But the message here is, Craig is a global citizen. He identified a problem, and he said, I need to be the solution. Citizenship is based on action, and that was the action that he did. His organization, Free the Children, has built schools and hospitals, in many impoverished countries. They have literally gone to some of these factories and freed the children, sometimes by force, sometimes by paying for the freedom of the kids. So it is an amazing testimony to citizenship. It's not the only global citizenship. We can think of many other people who act in similar manners, but it's hard to think of other 12-year-olds that get started doing things like that. Now, you could look at Greta and say, is she a global citizen? Yeah, even if you don't agree with what she is saying. Maybe you think that, she's committed to this campaign of climate change, and you may disagree. Maybe you don't think that climate change is an issue. But what she's doing is the exact same thing as Craig. She said, here's an issue that the world is facing. Here's how I need to be part of the solution. So the next part of our lesson here today, we're going to look at some issues that the world is facing. And I want you to think about, what kinds of solutions can people have? So one of the global challenges that we have right now is animal extinction. So for every challenge that we face this year in this course, there could be a response from global citizens. The death of bees. We keep being told that, bees, there's going to be a time in our future. How many people have heard, there might be a time in our future, there's no bees. No bees, no flowers. No flowers. A lot of the food we enjoy, we won't have.
Like honey.
Like honey. So the death of bees. Now, what would a global citizen do in response to the death of bees?
Save the bees.
Save the bees. We cannot wait for governments to do it all. Globalization operates on internet time, meaning quite quickly. Governments tend to be slow-moving by nature because they have to build political support for every step. So Kofi Annan, who was once the Secretary General, the leader of the United Nations, is saying governments can't do it. Here I am, I'm the leader of the biggest government of the world, the government of all governments, I'm the leader of the UN, and I'm saying don't wait for the government to be the ones to respond to the problems of the 21st century. It's up to citizens. So some may say that Elon Musk saying we need to have a city on Mars, that's global citizenship. He's saying we need a failsafe. That if an asteroid hits the planet Earth, or if we have a nuclear exchange that ends life on this planet, at least we have 10,000 or 100,000 people living in space that can continue our species' story. So some would say Elon Musk is a global citizen. He sees a problem and he's working towards a solution. Now, unfortunately, sometimes when people do work towards a solution, sometimes people are saying, wait a minute, is there a different motive that you have here? So sometimes wealthy, first world individuals may appear to be global citizens. But in fact, what they're doing is they're trying to help themselves. Sometimes they help themselves because they're creating an opportunity for their own business to become more viable, more profitable. Sometimes they're helping themselves because they want that social stigma. They want people to look at them and think, oh man, you're such a good person. You've given $100 billion to people living in poverty. They want that kind of cult-like following. So unfortunately, there are some, what you could say, false global citizens. Some people that may not be doing it for the right reason. They might be doing it to serve their own agenda. Sometimes countries will donate things to other countries. So Canada, our government in Canada, may say to an impoverished third world country, we are going to give you some aid. We're going to help you out. We're going to give you $25 billion. And then that sounds like a lot of money, and it is. But what we don't tell them is, it's kind of like $25 billion of Canadian Tire money, in the sense that you can only spend it at certain stores. And what we often do, what Canada often does in terms of aid, is we'll have a Canadian corporation that's not doing well, like Bombardier, and we tell a country in the third world, we're going to give you some free money, but what we're really doing is saying, you have to buy stuff from Bombardier. So what we're really doing is taking taxpayer dollars, giving it to the Sudan, and saying to Sudan, you have to buy some buses from Bombardier, or some trains from Bombardier. And then the Sudanese government might be like, but we don't need those trains and buses. That's not what we need. And the Canadian government's like, well, this is tied aid, meaning that there's conditions tied to the aid that I'm giving you, and you have to buy Bombardier stuff. So what ends up happening is, Canada gives this tied aid to Sudan. Sudan buys those things from Bombardier, and then the Sudanese government sells those things for pennies on the dollar, and then buys the guns or the whatever that is that they actually wanted to get. So in the end, the only real winner is Bombardier, and the biggest loser is the Canadian taxpayer. It's like a gift card. So what I'd like you to do is, in as safe of a cluster as you can, I want you to come up with 5 challenges that the world is facing. So it could be overpopulation, could be climate change, could be the lack of water that we've looked at. Okay, maybe 5's too much. Let's go for 3. 3's better than 5. I know, but it can be tough. 5's a big number. And I want you to come up with, these are the problems, but this is what a global citizen could do. Now here's the last little wrinkle in the puzzle. Another form of a global citizen can be a corporation. Corporations can be citizens. Tim Hortons, when you go to Tim Hortons, they might have a sign that says, our coffee bean is only through fair trade. We will only buy coffee beans where coffee bean growers are getting compensated appropriately. So we support fair trade. So there are corporations that are citizens. They're helping others respond to global challenges. So come up with 3 examples of problems we're facing and how we can address them. And then we'll call it at that. You can look at chapter 16 of the textbook for inspiration. There's a little bit in chapter 15 as well. And I'm not going to get you to hand something in, but I am marking you in the sense that I'm just going to kind of mark you on the fly. All right, there it is, global citizenship.